The frost came early that year, hard enough to split the water barrels by the kitchen door before the last of the harvest was even in. It smelled of wood smoke and wet stone, and the tallow the scullery girls burned too fast in the mornings. Calderley Hall stood grey against a greyer sky, its windows lit one by one, like a ship going dark, room by room, and under the kitchen eaves the cold settled into the bones of anyone fool enough to stand still in it. Edith Marsh was the kind of woman a house forgot the moment she left a room. She was not pretty. She was not plain enough to pity either, which was worse, because pity at least got you a second bowl of soup. She had been at Calderley 3 years. Since her mother died of the fever that took half the row houses on Thorn Lane, and she did the mending and the linen press and, when Mrs. Pruitt was short-handed, the still-room besides. She did not complain. She had learned early that complaining cost more than it earned. What nobody at Calderley knew, because she had never once let it show, was that Edith Marsh spoke French as easily as she spoke English. Her mother had been companion to an English lady married into a house outside Rouen, years before the fever, years before poverty, and she had taught her daughter the language the way some mothers taught daughters to sew. It was not a thing Edith had ever thought to use. A maid who spoke French above her station invited 2 kinds of trouble, and Edith had no wish to meet either. The frost was going to matter before the month was out. She did not know it yet, not in words, but she felt it the way she felt rain coming in her knuckles. Something was owed. Something was going to be asked of her that she had not chosen and could not refuse, and it would begin, as such things nearly always did at Calderley, at the kitchen gate after dark. She found the boy there on the coldest night of that early frost, huddled against the stone where the wall broke the wind least. He was perhaps 8. His feet were bare inside boots too large for him, stuffed with straw that had gone to nothing, and his lips had the blue look she had seen once before. On a woman on Thorn Lane who did not live to see morning. She did not call for help. She did not go and wake the house. She took off her own shawl, the one thing of her mother's she still owned, and put it around him without a word, and then she went back into the kitchen, and came out again, with bread and the end of a ham bone, and a cup of milk still warm from the scullery fire. And she sat with him on the cold stone step until his shivering slowed and his breathing came even. "What's your name?" she said, when he could speak. "Tam," he said. "Tam Higgins. Maid worked the stable here. He's gone now." "Gone where?" "Gone," the boy said, and would not say more, and she understood, and did not ask again. She stayed until the worst of the cold had gone out of him, and then she told him where the old hay barn was, the one nobody used past October, and told him to go there and not to the road, because the road that night would freeze a grown man. She gave him the shawl. She told him nothing about herself. When he asked her name she almost did not give it, and then she did, because a name costs nothing, and a boy alone in the cold deserved at least that much. She did not think of herself as doing a kindness. She thought of it, if she thought of it at all, as the only thing a person could do, and still call herself a person. She would have done it for anyone. She told herself that on the walk back to the kitchen door, the shawl gone, her arms bare to the wind, and she believed it, and it was true. She did not know that above her, in the window of the estate office that overlooked the kitchen yard, the Duke of Calderley stood in the dark, with a glass of brandy he had not touched, unable to sleep for the 3rd night running, and had watched the whole of it from beginning to end. Gabriel Renwick had inherited the dukedom 4 years before he wanted it, when his brother's horse threw him into a low wall and did not let him get up again. He was 33 now, hard-boned rather than handsome, with a nose that had been broken once in a hunting fool and set imperfectly, and eyes the brown of strong tea that missed very little and gave away less. He had been engaged, before the dukedom came to him, to a woman named Constance Ashby, fair and clever and admired everywhere she went, until the night he found her laughing at a housemaid who had spilled wine on her hem, laughing in a way that had nothing warm in it at all. He had broken the engagement within the week. He had not trusted easily since. He did not know the maid's name that night. He knew only what he had seen, a girl in the cold, giving away the coat off her own, back to a child who could do nothing for her. Not the arms of a woman being watched, not the performance of charity done for an audience, because there had been no audience. There had been only him, by pure accident, standing at a dark window, with a glass he had forgotten to drink. He told no one what he had seen. He was not yet certain what to do with it. But the next morning he asked Mrs. Pruitt, in a voice carefully idle, whether any of the kitchen girls had lost a shawl, and when the housekeeper said she did not know of one, he let the matter drop, and quietly, without her ever knowing it came from him, arranged that a boy answering to the name of Tam Higgins should be found lodging in the old groom's quarters and a meal twice a day from the kitchen, on the understanding that no one was to ask where the order had come from. She did not know then that the shawl she had given away in the dark had been seen. She did not know that the man who had seen it was the same man whose house she scrubbed and mended for 6 days out of every 7, or that from that night forward, without a word to her, he had begun, very quietly, to watch. Edith noticed, 3 days later, that Tam Higgins had new boots. She noticed it the way she noticed most things that were not her business, which was to say she noticed and said nothing. Mrs. Pruitt mentioned it over the mending, in the dry way she mentioned most things. "Somebody's taken a fancy to the Higgins boy," the housekeeper said. "New boots, a place to sleep that isn't a hay barn. Somebody with more money than sense, and more sense than to put his name to it." "Do you know who?" Edith said. "I know who does most of the deciding in this house, Mrs." Pruitt said, and left it there, and Edith, who had learned not to ask twice, let it lie. She was called to the estate office the following week, not for the mending, but because the Duke's man of business had spilled ink across a ledger, and there was no one else free to copy it fair before the quarter accounts went to the steward. She had a clean hand. It was one of the few things about her that anyone above stairs had ever remarked on, and only because it was useful. She sat at the small desk by the window, copying figures in a room that smelled of leather and old paper, and the cold ash of a fire not yet lit, and she did not expect the Duke to be there at all, and then he was, standing at the shelf behind her with a book open in his hand, silent for so long she nearly forgot he was in the room. "You write a fair hand," he said. "Thank you, Your Grace. Where did you learn it?" "My mother taught me. She kept a lady's accounts once, before I was born. It was true as far as it went, and she did not say the rest." He turned a page. She kept copying figures. The quiet between them was not uncomfortable, only close, the way a small room makes any silence close, and after a while he said, without looking up from the book, "Do you know French, Miss Marsh?" Her pen did not stop. That, at least, she had trained herself to manage. "No, Your Grace," she said. It was the first lie she had told in that house, and she felt it land in her chest like a dropped stitch, and she did not know, could not have known, that he had asked only because he had seen her lips move, very slightly, reading the spine of the book in his hand, which was a treatise printed in Rouen, and that he had noticed, and said nothing more. and let the matter go for the time being the way a man lets a hooked fish run before he reels it in. She left the office that afternoon feeling watched in a way she could not name, and told herself it was nothing and was wrong. Winter thinned into a hard, bright cold, the kind that made the fields ring like struck iron underfoot, and the household began to talk of guests. Not the ordinary kind. A French party was coming, a Comte de Vos and his people, to discuss an investment in the wool trade that ran through Caldelay's tenant lands, an arrangement the old Duke had begun and died before finishing, and Gabriel Renwick meant to see it done properly or not at all. He was not fluent in French himself, not fluent enough to trust his own ear in a room full of clauses and figures, and so a translator had been engaged. A Monsieur Aumont, recommended by the Duke's own cousin, Lady Seraphina Vane, who managed to be present at every important conversation in the house without ever once being asked to leave. Lady Seraphina was the old Duke's niece by marriage, widowed young, elegant in the particular way that made other women feel their own dresses had been chosen badly, and she had a laugh she produced in exactly 3 notes, like a clock reminding a room what time it was. She had made it plain, in the small ways available to a woman of her rank, that she considered the dukedom a thing that had gone to the wrong branch of the family, and Gabriel a poor custodian of it, careful and grave where his brother had been easy and beloved. She noticed Edith the first week of the frost, the way she noticed any servant whose face she had not troubled to learn. "You," she said in the hall, to Edith carrying linen, "you are the one who sat with the beggar boy at the gate." Edith stopped. She had not known anyone above stairs knew of it. "I don't know what your ladyship means," she said, which was not quite a lie and not quite the truth either. "Don't play the innocent with me. Half the kitchen saw you giving away your own shawl like a woman with 10 to spare." Lady Seraphina's mouth curved, not quite a smile. "It is a sweet story. Poor girls do so love a sweet story about themselves. It costs nothing, and it buys such a great deal of sympathy. It cost me the shawl," Edith said. "That is all it cost. I wanted no sympathy for it, and I'll have none, if it please your ladyship." For a long moment Lady Seraphina only looked at her, the way one looks at a dog that has spoken. Then she laughed, her 3 exact notes, and swept on down the hall, and Edith stood with the linen in her arms, and did not let her hands shake until the lady had turned the corner. The French party arrived on a bright, hard morning in the 2nd week of the new year, 4 carriages deep, and the house was turned inside out to receive them. Edith was set to wait at table with the other undermaids, which meant she stood against the wall with the pictures and said nothing, and was seen by no one, which suited her exactly. Monsieur Aumont was a neat, soft-spoken man with excellent manners and a way of smiling that did not reach past his mouth. He sat at the Duke's right hand through the long dinner, and rendered the Comte's pleasantries into English so smoothly that no one in the room thought to question a word of it, and Edith, standing against the wall with a pitcher of wine, understood every syllable that passed in French down the table, and said nothing, because it was not her place, and because a maid who understood French above her station invited exactly the kind of trouble she had spent 3 years avoiding. She told herself that. She told herself it through the soup and the fish and the long dull speeches about wool prices and shipping rights, and she almost believed it until the moment near the end of the meal when the Comte de Vos leaned toward his own steward and said in French, low and easy, that the common grazing land along the river would revert to the investors within 2 years regardless of what was written in the contract, because no English clerk would trouble to read the old surveys closely enough to catch it. Monsieur Aumont, a heartbeat later, told the Duke of Caldelet that the Comte had expressed his admiration for the excellent management of the estate and his confidence that the tenant farms would prosper under the new arrangement. Edith's hands did not shake. She made certain of that. But something in her chest went very still and very cold, colder than the gate had been on the night she gave away her shawl, because she understood, in that moment, with perfect clarity, exactly whose land was being spoken of, and exactly who would starve on it in 2 years' time. And one of them was a boy named Tam Higgins, who now slept warm because of new boots he did not know the origin of. She said nothing that night. She carried the pitchers and cleared the plates, and went to bed in the small cold room she shared with 2 other maids, and she lay awake a long time, turning the sentence over, and over, and over, until it wore a groove in her like water wearing a groove in stone. She did not sleep. In the morning she rose before the house did, and she thought of Tam, and she thought of her mother, who had taught her the words in the first place, for no better reason than love, and she made up her mind, though it frightened her more than the cold ever had, that she would not carry a lie up the stairs a second time, and set it down at the Duke's door, and call it none of her business. The negotiations continued through that week and the next, and each day Edith stood against the wall with her pitcher, and each day she heard a small, careful gap open between what was said in French and what was carried into English, never large enough to be caught by an honest man listening only in his own tongue, always large enough to matter to the people who would live or starve by it. A grazing right here, a term of years there, a clause about the mill rents that Monsieur Aumont rendered as generous when the Comte had called it, privately, a formality that would not survive the first hard winter. She watched Lady Seraphina at these dinners more closely than she had watched anyone in her life. She saw the small nods that passed between the lady and the translator when he thought no one troubled to look. She began to understand, slowly, the way one understands a stain is old damp and not new, that this was not carelessness. It was arrangement, and she began to understand that if she said what she knew, she would be calling a duke's own cousin a party to fraud, on the word of a maid who was not supposed to know French at all, and that the likeliest end of such an accusation was her own dismissal, without character, in the dead of winter, with nowhere to go and no one to vouch for her once Lady Seraphina had finished with her name. She thought of that for 3 days. She thought of Tam Higgins in his new boots. She thought of the tenant families along the river whose faces she did not know and whose names she had never heard, who would lose their grazing and never once learn why. She thought, too, of the Duke himself, grave and tired and courteous to a fault, sitting at the head of his own table being made a fool of in a language he had trusted a stranger to carry for him honestly. She did not think it was her place to speak. She thought it anyway. That was the difference, she decided, between what was owed and what was easy, and she had never in her life confused the two. She asked to see him alone on the 4th morning, through Mrs. Pruitt, who raised her eyebrows and asked no questions, because Mrs. Pruitt had long since learned that Edith Marsh did not ask for things lightly. He received her in the estate office, the same room where she had once told him she did not know French. He stood by the cold hearth with his hands behind his back, and he looked at her the way a man looks at a locked door he has been told holds something valuable, and said, "Well, Miss Marsh." She did not curtsy. She had meant to, and found she could not make herself do it, not with what she had come to say sitting in her mouth like a stone. "Your translator is lying, Your Grace," she said. He did not move. For a long moment the fire, unlit, gave no sound at all, and the only thing in the room was the cold and her own heartbeat, and the look on his face, which she could not read, and had never once been able to read. "That is a serious thing to say of a man in my employ," he said. "I know it. I would not say it if I did not know it for certain. And how would a laundry maid come to know it for certain?" She had rehearsed this part, lying awake, and still it cost her more than she expected to say it plain. "Because I understand French, Your Grace. My mother taught me. I told you once that I did not, and it was a lie, and I am sorry for it, and I will not compound it with another. Monsieur Aumont has been telling you one thing at your table, and the Comte de Vos another thing entirely among his own people, and the difference is the grazing land along the river and the mill rents, and in 2 years' time it will be the ruin of every tenant on that stretch, and none of them will ever know why, because none of them speak French either." He was silent long enough that she thought she had already lost her place, her character, her roof, and she made herself stand still for it, the way she had made herself stand still through worse. "Tell me what was said," he said, "word for word, as near as you can give it to me." She told him. She gave him the sentence about the surveys, and the sentence about the mill rents, and the small private laugh the Comte had shared with his steward over the wording of the grazing clause, and she watched something in the Duke's face go very quiet and very hard while she spoke. Not at her, she understood that much even then, but at what she was telling him. "You might have told me this the first night," he said, when she had finished. "I might have lost my place the first night. Telling it," she said. "I near lost it telling it now. And you told me anyway. I would not have slept easy otherwise. There's a boy at the gate wears boots someone gave him. There's families on that river I've never met who'll lose their grazing and never know why. I couldn't carry the lie up your stairs a second time and call it none of my affair. Your Grace, it is everyone's affair when it's done in the dark like this." He looked at her a long moment, and she did not know that in that look he was seeing, without quite meaning to, a girl at a gate giving away her own shawl to a child who could do nothing for her in return. And she did not know that he was thinking, with a clarity that frightened him rather more than it pleased him, that he had now watched this same woman do the costly, unrewarded thing twice, once when she believed no one saw her at all, and once when she believed the seeing of it would ruin her. "Say nothing of this to anyone," he said finally. "Not to Mrs. Pruitt, not to the boy, no one." "Yes, Your Grace. That is not dismissal, Miss Marsh. That is discretion. There is a difference. I know the difference," she said, and left him standing by the cold hearth, and did not know, walking away, whether she had just saved her place or ended it. Word of what had passed in the estate office did not stay contained, whatever discretion the Duke had asked of her, because Monsieur Aumont himself grew careless in his relief when no accusation came at once, and mentioned to Lady Seraphina, in an unguarded hour, that the Duke had been asking pointed questions about the survey language, questions he had not thought to ask before, and Lady Seraphina, who missed very little either, went looking for the source of it, and found, without much difficulty, that a certain laundry maid had been closeted alone with the Duke for the better part of an hour on the very morning the questions began. She came upon Edith 3 days later in the linen room, and shut the door behind her, which Edith had never known her to do. "You've been telling tales to my cousin," Lady Seraphina said. "I've been telling him the truth, my lady. The truth from a maid who cannot read a ledger, about a treaty drawn by men who have negotiated such contracts across half of Europe. Do you know what you sound like, telling such a story? You sound like a jealous, grasping little creature who has decided that because a duke once let you sit in his office copying figures, you have some claim on his trust that a gentleman of Monsieur Aumont's standing does not. I know what I heard, my lady. I know French as well as I know English. I did not ask to know it. I only do. How convenient, Lady Seraphina said, that a maid who scrubs floors happens to speak the one language that lets her accuse better people than herself of lying. Do you know how that sounds to anyone with sense? It sounds like a lie built to make yourself important. It sounds like exactly the kind of story a plain, friendless little nobody tells when she has nothing else to offer a man of rank but a scandal she has invented to get his notice. Edith's hands, folded in front of her apron, did not move. "I've offered nothing," she said. "I've asked for nothing either. I told His Grace what I heard because it was true, and because I could not carry it and sleep. If you think that makes me a liar, my lady, you may think it. It won't make it less true. We shall see what my cousin thinks, once he has had time to consider how it looks," Lady Seraphina said. "A maid who claims a gentleman's translator false, on no evidence but her own word, a word that happens to have been given to him alone, behind a closed door, with no one else present to say what passed between you." She let that sit a moment, the shape of the insinuation plain enough without her needing to finish it. "Men in his position have been ruined by less scandal than that, Miss Marsh. I should think of your own situation, if I were you, before I thought so hard of everyone else's." She left the room without waiting for an answer, and Edith stood alone among the folded linen, with her heart going hard and fast, and understood, for the first time, the full shape of what she had put at risk. Not only her place, her name, and, by the sound of that last remark, his as well, if Lady Seraphina meant to turn the story into something uglier than a maid speaking truth to power. She did not go to the Duke again. She told herself it was discretion, as he had asked, and told herself that was the whole of the reason, and knew somewhere under the telling that it was also fear, and something worse than fear, a kind of grief she had no name for yet, at the thought that she had handed her honesty to a man who might, in the end, find it easier to believe his cousin than his maid. Within the week, without any formal word ever being said to her directly, Edith found her duties quietly reduced, her name left off the roster for service above stairs, her place at the linen press given over to a girl newly hired from the village. No one told her she was dismissed. No one needed to. Mrs. Pruitt's face, when Edith asked her plainly what was happening, had a carefulness in it Edith had never seen there before, the carefulness of a woman who knew more than she was willing to say. "It's not my doing," was all Mrs. Pruitt would tell her. "And I'll tell you this much for nothing, Edith Marsh. Whatever you did it for the right reasons. I've known you 3 years, and I've never once known you to lie for your own gain. Hold to that, whatever comes of it. It doesn't feel like enough to hold to," Edith said, "when I don't know what's coming." "It's what you've got," Mrs. Pruitt said. Best make it enough, she thought, more than once in those cold, uncertain days, of simply going, of taking what little she had and walking to her aunt's house 2 villages over, sparing herself whatever ending Lady Seraphina was arranging for her. She did not go. She told herself it was because she had nowhere better to be, and that was true enough, but it was also true that some stubborn, unbending part of her refused to run from a thing she had done honestly, as though running would make it a lie after all. She wrote, instead, a short letter to the Duke, the only one she ever wrote him. She did not ask to keep her place. She asked only that whatever became of her, the boy Tam Higgins not be turned out for having known her, since the boy had done nothing but sit cold at a gate on a night when someone happened to be kind to him. She left the letter with Mrs. Pruitt to be given to him when he had the time for it, and then she went back to her small room and waited, the way she had learned to wait for most things in her life, without expecting the waiting to end well. It was Mrs. Pruitt who came to her 3 evenings later, letting herself into the little room without knocking, her face lit strangely in the candlelight, half laughing and half near tears, which was not a combination Edith had ever seen on her before. "You'd best sit down," the housekeeper said. "I am sitting." "Sit down harder, then. I've something to tell you, and I don't rightly know how to tell it plain, so I'll just say it. The boots that boy of yours wears, the lodging he's had since the frost, the doctor that came out to see to his chest when it went bad last month, none of that came from the parish, and none of it came from me, though I'll own I let people think it did, because I was asked to." She paused, and there was something almost tender in the way she said the rest of it. It was his grace, all of it, since the first week. He gave strict word that his name was never to come into it. Edith sat very still. "He's watched over that boy since before you ever spoke a word of French to him," Mrs. Pruitt went on. "And I'll tell you something else, since I'm telling tales tonight, and might as well tell all of them. He knows the truth of your translator now. He sent his own steward, quiet, to check the old survey lines against what was written in that contract, and your steward found precisely what you told him he would find. The Comte's man has been sent from the house already. Lady Seraphina is a great deal less comfortable in her position than she was a week ago." She reached over and took Edith's cold hand in her own warm one. "You did not lose your place, girl. You lost your duties above stairs, because he did not want you standing at his cousin's mercy in that dining room one more night, while he settled the matter properly. That is not the same thing as dismissal, whatever it looked like to you sitting alone up here fretting yourself thin." Edith did not cry. She had trained herself long ago not to cry where it showed, and she did not break that training now, though something in her chest loosened all at once, painfully, like a tight knot finally given slack. "He watched Tam at the gate," she said slowly, "that first night. He was there. He was," Mrs. Pruitt said, "watching from the office window, unable to sleep, same as most nights since his brother died. He never told me that himself, mind, I had it from his valet, who has known him longest and worries for him most. But I believe it. It explains a great deal about how quick he was to believe a maid over a French Comte, when most men in his place would have believed the Comte and never thought twice. Why did he never say? Because he is not a man who says things easily," Mrs. Pruitt said. "You'll have noticed that yourself, I expect." Edith had noticed it. She had noticed it in the estate office over the ledger, and in the long silence after she told him his translator was lying, and in every terse, careful word he had given her since the day she first lied to him about knowing French at all. She sat with the housekeeper's warm hand around her cold one, and thought, for the first time since the whole business began, that perhaps she had not been wrong to trust him with the truth, even not knowing how he would use it. He came to her 2 days after that, not summoning her to the estate office as he had before, but coming himself to the small parlour off the kitchen where the upper servants took their tea, at an hour when he knew, because Mrs. Pruitt had told him, that she would be alone there mending a torn hymn by the fire. She stood when he entered. He motioned, briefly, for her to sit again, and when she did not, he did not press it, only stood near the door, with his hands loosely at his sides, in a way she had never once seen him stand, as though he had left some of his usual bearing outside the room, on purpose. "I owe you an accounting, Miss Marsh," he said. "I have put it off longer than I ought, and I find I do not know how to begin it gracefully, so I will begin it plainly instead, since that is the manner you have always used with me. You owe me nothing, Your Grace." "I owe you a great deal," he said, "and I mean to pay it, whether or not you think it necessary." He looked, for a moment, at the small fire rather than at her. "I watched you at the kitchen gate the night you gave your shawl to that boy. I did not know your name then. I knew only what I saw, a woman doing a costly, unbidden kindness for a child who could give her nothing back, believing herself entirely unwatched. I have thought of it more times since than I can properly account for. When you told me, weeks later, that you did not know French, I did not press you on it, because I understood even then that a woman in your position had good reason to guard whatever small advantage she possessed. When you came to me and told me the truth of Omont, at real cost to yourself, I already half suspected something amiss, but I confess I did not expect the courage to expose it to come from the same person I had watched give away her shawl in the snow. I wanted to see what such a person would do, when she believed telling the truth might ruin her. You did not know I was testing anything. I did not fully know it myself until it was done. But I understand now that I have been watching you, in one way or another, since the first frost, and that everything I have seen has told me the same thing about you, over and over, without your ever once intending it to be seen at all." She did not know what to say to that. She stood by the fire with the mending forgotten in her hands, and felt her own pulse in her throat. "You let me believe I might be dismissed," she said. "I let you believe worse than that, I think, and I am sorry for it. I could not move against my own cousin and a foreign delegation on the strength of a rumour. I needed the survey confirmed before I could act, and that took days I could not shorten, however much I wished to. I should have found some way to tell you it would end well. I did not, and you suffered for my silence, and that is mine to answer for, not yours. And Lady Seraphina will be leaving Caldelet within the month for an estate in the north better suited, I think, to her particular talents for arranging other people's business. Monsieur Omont has already gone. The contract will be renegotiated with honest terms or not signed at all. The tenants along the river will keep their grazing, whatever else comes of it." He paused. "None of that repays what I let you carry these past weeks. I know that. You've repaid Tam 100 times over already," she said, "and never asked to be thanked for it." "I did not do it to be thanked, no," she said. "I know. That's rather the whole of it, isn't it?" For the first time since she had known him, something close to a smile moved at the corner of his mouth, brief and unpractised, gone almost before it arrived. And she understood it, the way Mrs. Pruitt had once told her she would, as an event rather than an ordinary thing. "I would like," he said, "to give you back your place above stairs, and more besides, if you would have it. But I will not ask you to answer me tonight, or even this month. You have had enough asked of you without warning. Whatever you decide, about your place in this house, or about anything else I might in time wish to ask you, I would rather have your honest no than a yes given, only because you feel some duty to give it, after everything that has passed between us. I have had enough in my life of women who say yes prettily and mean nothing by it. I find I would rather wait a year for your true answer than take an easy one tonight." She looked at him a long moment, this grave, careful man who had watched her in secret and paid a stranger's boy's way in secret, and told her the truth of both things only once he could no longer avoid it. And she thought of her mother, who had taught her French for no better reason than love, and she thought that perhaps some debts were not meant to be repaid quickly, and that this, whatever it was beginning to be, was one of them. "I don't need a year, Your Grace," she said. "But I'll not answer tonight all the same. Not because I don't know my own mind, because I think you ought to hear it when you're ready to believe it, and not simply because you've asked." "That," he said, "is a fairer answer than I deserve," and he left her by the fire, with the mending still forgotten in her lap, and she sat a long while after he had gone, turning the whole strange shape of it over in her hands like a coin she had never seen minted before. Spring came slow that year, the way it always did along the river, the frost giving up its ground an inch at a time, until one morning the whole valley smelled of wet earth instead of wood smoke. And Edith found herself, without quite deciding it in any single moment, spending a good deal more of her days in the estate office than the mending ever required. She kept the ledgers now, properly, her clean hand put to steady use, and the Duke of Caldelet had taken to asking her opinion on matters no maid before her had ever been asked to weigh in on, tenant rents and school fees, and, once, whether a certain phrase in a new contract with a Bristol merchant read honestly or wanted watching. "You have made yourself useful past all reason, Mrs., Pruitt told her one afternoon, not unkindly. "Half this house doesn't know whether to call you a maid or a steward these days. I don't much mind what they call me," Edith said, "so long as it isn't liar. No one's called you that in this house for months, and well you know it." It was true. Lady Seraphina had gone north in the early spring, as promised, with a great deal of dignity and very little warmth from anyone who watched her go, and her name was seldom spoken at Caldelet afterward, except in the dry, unforgiving way Mrs. Pruitt spoke of anyone who had troubled the house and left it. Tam Higgins, meanwhile, had grown a full inch since winter, by his own proud reckoning, and could now read 3 whole pages of a primer without help, taught in the evenings by the same steward who had once verified a fraudulent survey line by line. And he had taken to trailing after Edith through the kitchen yard with the devotion of a boy who understood, in his own way, exactly who had first kept him from freezing at a gate. It was Tam, in fact, who was present on the June evening the Duke finally asked her the question he had promised, months before, not to press. He found her in the walled garden behind the house, gloves in her hands, tending the roses Mrs. Pruitt had given up on entirely. And Tam was some distance off chasing a moth with more enthusiasm than success. "I said I would wait until you were ready to answer," Gabriel said, "and I have tried to keep to that. But it is June, Edith, and I find I have run rather short of patience I did not know I possessed in such large amounts." It was the first time he had used her Christian name. She noticed it the way one notices a change in weather, all at once and completely. "You've never once used my name before," she said. "No, I have been waiting, I think, for permission I was too proud to ask for outright." "You have it," she said. "You've had it a good while, if you'd thought to ask." He came closer, and reached, with a carefulness that made the ordinary act suddenly grave, for her hand still gloved from the roses, and drew the glove from it, finger by finger, slow enough that she felt each one loosen before the last, until her bare hand lay in his. "I do not love you for the kindness you did that boy," he said. "Or not only for that. I love you for the fact that you did it believing no one of any consequence could see you, and would have done it exactly the same had I never stood at that window at all. I love you for telling me the truth about Omont when the truth cost you everything and the lie would have cost you nothing. I have known a great many people in my life who were kind when it was seen and honest when it was safe. I have known perhaps one in 33 years who was both when she believed she was entirely alone in it. "I'll want conditions," she said, "before I answer you properly. Name them. Never to be lied to again, not even kindly, not even to spare me a hard week's waiting, and never to have my word doubted before it's been heard out, whatever quarter the doubting comes from." "Both are yours already," he said, "and would have been whether you asked for them or not." "Then yes," she said. "It's the only word I need to give you, and I give it plain." He kissed her bare hand, once, gravely, the way a man kisses something he intends to go on honouring long after the moment has passed, and behind them, entirely unnoticed, Tam Higgins finally caught his moth and let it go again, laughing, because he had only ever wanted to see if he could. They were married that autumn, quietly, in the small stone church at Thorn Hollow, rather than in London, because both of them, in their different ways, had had quite enough of being watched by people who meant them no particular good. It was, everyone agreed afterward, a small wedding for a duke and a grand one for a laundry maid, and neither of them much cared which account of it anyone chose to keep. A year later, almost to the week, the frost came early again, hard enough to wring the fields like struck iron, and in the estate office at Calderley Hall a fire was lit well before dark, because the Duke's wife had never quite lost her habit of feeling the cold in her hands first. Tam Higgins, 11 now, and reading better than half the grown men on the estate, sat at the small desk copying figures under the steward's patient eye, his boots, this year, entirely his own, and needing no one's secret charity to provide them. Lady Seraphina wrote once from the north, a short, cold letter that went, by mutual and wordless agreement, straight into the fire unread. By the hearth that evening, Gabriel Renwick took his wife's bare hand in his, the way he had first taken it in the garden, and did not let it go, not when the fire popped. Not when the last light went out of the window, not for a long while after either of them had anything left to say. Outside, past the kitchen gate where a shawl had once been given away for nothing to a stranger who could offer nothing back, the frost settled over the wall the way it settled every year, patient and certain, asking no one's leave. It is a plain enough thing to say, and yet the world forgets it every winter. Character is not what is done before an audience. It is what is done at a cold gate, in the dark, when no one of consequence is thought to be watching at all.